Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bazaar Over Explain. I am the Bazaar Whisperer, and we have a brand new patch 6.0, here on September 10th. It is officially Season 6 of the Bazaar, and there's some major changes going into this patch and some long-awaited ones, so let's dive into it. The first here being these design goals. So this will give us kind of the overarching idea of what this patch is trying to do, and then we'll see in more detail how that all transpires. So the first thing here is reduce the power level of Stelle, particularly in the early game, and they did nerf private runabout, so we'll see that in a minute here. But I think that the changes that they've made to Stelle that I've seen thus far make a lot of sense, and I think it's going to be make for some more balanced gameplay with the character. So that was a little too strong in both the early and I would say the late game in the initial iteration of the character. So we'll see how that all plays out, but I think it's for the best. The next thing here is reduce the power level of out of combat scaling items. So we did see some on Stelle. We also saw, of course, many on Pygmalien with the money tree and things of that nature, and a lot of that has been nerfed, but not nerfed into the ground. It's still a viable strategy. It's just going to be a little bit harder to do with changes to items like the VIP pass, which we'll talk about. Next here is make the strongest enchants with the biggest immediate impact rarer. So obsidian and shielding. Generally, when you get to the late game in the Bazaar, you're going to need a mix of both offense and defense unless you're a one-shot build. So having obsidian and shielding be harder to obtain makes it a little more polarizing in the late game and a little bit harder for everyone to kind of do both offense and defense at the same time, which I think is probably for the best, realistically. But yeah, as they say here, it often makes for a culprit, making otherwise safe items into a problem. I mean, we've seen that over and over and over again with big scaling items, whether that's on Mak, Pygmalien, or otherwise. Obsidian can do some pretty crazy things. Then the last one here is improving the numbers on existing items that are not seeing so much play, so making more items viable. They did do a lot of small tweaks. They didn't do a lot of huge reworks on items this patch, but I do think that we are going to see some of these items crop up more in our runs and be more viable with the tweaks that they made. Like 1 or 2 seconds here and there, 5-10 damage here and there does make a lot of sense. But the biggest change overall definitely has to be to matchmaking, and this is a huge and very welcome change, I would say. One that I think maybe even should have been in the game from the beginning, just so that newer players aren't kind of at this disadvantage when they're facing players who are very seasoned in the game with their ghosts, and thus they are not winning and they don't necessarily understand why. So let's get into that. So they're changing the way that matchmaking works in ranked and in normal modes. And with this, players will only be matched with ghosts of players of their rank or lower for their PvP fights. So you're not going to be, if you're bronze, facing a silver, gold, or diamond tier, or even legendary opponent. You're just going to be facing other bronze players, which is a huge shakeup to how we do things here in the Bazaar. When you're first starting out and you see that you're facing a legendary player and you don't even know what that is, but you see the huge red border, chances are you're probably not going to win that fight. So this is a really awesome change here. Other things to this is that the experience for higher ranked players should not be changed, as they can still play against ghosts of any single rank. So if you are a diamond player, you can be playing against bronze, silver, and gold and things of that nature. So you're still going to have those swings of easier opponents and harder opponents, but really this is just a better change for those, again, who are just starting out in the game. And then they have this big table here that talks about this point, which is players will now gain and lose rank points throughout the ranking process to help keep them in a proper rank for their current skill level. So we saw this a little bit before, where it was more uniform in the beginning. We would lose 1 or 2 of our rank points and kind of D-rank. We had then the latest iteration, which is that you don't lose any rank points, and then you can just kind of scale up, and it was kind of just a matter of time until you hit legend. And then finally, we have this now where it's kind of a punishing system, but it also is a pretty rewarding system in some ways for higher ranks. But I think for lower ranks, it makes a lot of sense. So for bronze, we're going to see here that on the left-hand side, this is how many wins you get per run, and then it will translate into how many rank points that you're going to be getting for those wins. So starting from the bottom here, from bronze, we have -2 for 0. Silver, we get -3 rank points. Gold, -4, and diamond, -5. And you're going to kind of see this overarching theme where if you're a higher rank and you're not going to be getting any wins, you're going to be pretty severely punished for that. So if you're a diamond rank and have a 0 win run, well, you just lost 5 rank points. That's unfortunate. But on the flip side of that, at any rank, you can at 10 wins get 5 points, and at 9 wins get 4 points, at 8 wins get 3 points, and then bronze here we see if you're at 7 win, you get 3 points. Silver, you get 2. Gold, you get 2. Diamond, you get 2. So all this being said is that you have the ability, if you're pretty consistent with your 10 wins, to rank up very, very quickly. It's more so you're just getting punished pretty severely if you are losing in those early parts of the game. I wonder if this is going to change the meta, because generally speaking, if there's no punishment for getting like a 0 win like we had in last patch, there's not really any disincentive to go for late game builds or go for like your death enchant and things of that nature and go for like a super scaling build, because, well, if it doesn't pay off, well, it didn't affect your rank. But now it's a little more risky to do that, because if you only get 2-3 wins, well, if you're a diamond player, you just lost 2 or 3 of your rank points. Mind you, this is not going to apply to everyone, because not everyone is going to be at diamond, but I do think that this will make for a better play experience overall for people. It'll make grinding and ranked, I think, seem it'll be more tedious in the way that you are losing points, which sucks. However, it's going to probably give you a better overall play experience, where it's going to capture your level, you facing the opponents of appropriate level and skill and ability and that sort of stuff. Just because, if you're gold, well, you're not facing any diamond or legendary players. You're facing at best other gold players. So the other thing to that is that at the beginning of the season, well, if you're a new player at the beginning of the season, you might want to wait like a day or two as all the like natural gold, diamond, and legendary players just kind of blitz through things. And then finally, once those players have kind of calibrated out, is when you're going to be facing what makes or people that are more of your average skill level. So all this said, I think this is a really good change, and again, something that I think would have probably benefited the game a long time ago, but hey, better late than never. Glad to see it, and I think it's going to make for some pretty good stuff moving forward. Moving forward to some other general changes here. So enchantments, they've cleaned up or balanced a lot of the pass enchants that we can look at here in a moment. They've added gold enchant to a lot of different items. So most items, if not, that doesn't say all items, but most items. Deadly enchants on a number of items have been adjusted. Interested to see what that looks like. The obsidian enchant, as we saw up top, would be pretty rare, so it's very rare, and it's no longer in options like Ayla, which is pretty interesting. Silver tier and lower merchants also no longer sell enchanted items, so we're just going to overall see a lot less enchants in the game, just on our terms of our boards, because silver tier, when you get to the later days, you're going to start to see more and more enchants on those items, so now we're probably going to see a lot less on our boards and on our opponent's boards. Other kind of more minor things, I think the pricing changes in terms of legendary items. They buy for lower, sell for lower, that sort of stuff. Prospero's now a gold tier event. Other things here, Dire Mosquito has been nerfed a little bit, not 200 health. We'll see if that really matters. Some bigger things here that we saw that were kind of exploited, and I say exploited not in the way that it wasn't intended, but just in the way that it was really powerful. And if you got this sort of synergy, you were in a pretty good spot with the regen skills. So they no longer boost the output of items that give you permanent regen outside of combat. So there were items like the lunchbox where you could sell different items and get more regen than you probably would have, or the item realistically could have given you, as you could have like the lunchbox, let's say, gives you like 2 regen if you sell a specific item. And you know what, why don't we just pull up lunchbox so I can explain this better. So if you had the lunchbox, it has this key ability here where it says when you sell a food item, you gain 1, 2, or 3 regen. Well, if you had a skill that says your regen items gain +2 regen, that 1 regen turns to 3 regen, and so on and so forth. So you could stack up a tremendous amount of regen with these sorts of items, and now you can no longer do that. Another nice change here is that the free loot items like get scrap or whatever, and that might be no longer appear on heroes that don't generally use that output. So I can think of like scrap specifically for Mak. Mak doesn't have really any shielding items naturally, and thus when you get the scrap event, it's like, okay, cool, I just wasted a shop, or like that's 2 gold. I guess I could take that, but generally you would want something much more powerful in that 3 option slot. Other things here, players can now access settings from collection and chest. Didn't really matter too much before. The game's a little more sped up in that you get that experience shard a little more quicker, so runs are a little more snappy. There's a new loading screen, and yeah, those are the big general changes here. But why don't we go ahead and jump into the different character changes. So again, they're trying to rebalance the game here a little bit, and the goal is that they're making more items viable compared to where they were before. So I'll go through each one of these changes here in more traditional fashion. So the apothecary cooldown has been reduced to 5 seconds from 6 seconds. We love to see that. So an item that is probably already pretty powerful just got even more powerful, so that's kind of exciting in its own right. Atmospheric sampler now only charges items that were not the original trigger, so they can't charge themselves. You can't have one item on board just repeatedly charging itself is what this looks like. So you can't just kind of abuse that with like the big dragon and have the dragon repeatedly charge itself from the atmospheric sampler. You're gonna have at least 2 items to get them going back and forth. Moving off forth here, so Black Rose cooldown to 7 was 8, regen a little bit better in terms of scaling. Love to see that. This is always one of those items where I wanted it to be good, but just wasn't realistically. So we'll see if this 1 second makes a difference. Boiling Flask, so this is a pretty powerful potions enabler in that it's going to give your potions that are adjacent to it multicast. With that, I'm not sure that the problem, and I say problem, or like the point of this item, the like big reason why it's powerful is its cooldown, because it does reload the items next to it, but it ultimately does have a higher cooldown, so you're not going to be reloading those items nearly as quickly. Other things here, so we see that the cauldron, the poison and burn, has been buffed so that it's changed to 2, 3, 4 per type and was 1, 2, 3. So the cauldron has nearly doubled, and well, has on at least at bronze tier doubled in its power, and then it might be now even more viable once we get to the later portions of the game. Still an item that is probably not going to be your end game engine that you want, but something that can be nice in the mid game. Next here is the Covetous Raven, so damage has been changed to 80, 120, 160, so it's gotten a pretty large damage increase here. Looking just specifically at silver tier, it gets 40 more damage on the item and gets 60 more damage at this diamond tier, so that's pretty cool. I think that the Covetous Raven is one of those items that I really have wanted to be good for its entirety in the Bazaar, but I've never really seen it kind of pop off. So I think with this damage number, genuinely, I think getting 40 and 60 more damage on this item is enough to make it certainly in the conversation for items that we would be looking at. Next item here is Death Cap, so it is going to poison your enemies and then also give your poison items more poisoning. So now it scales a little bit higher, which is pretty nice. Generally, if you get this thing to diamond tier, your board is probably not where you want it to be, but just having it at bronze or silver, or I guess that'll be silver then gold, thinking about it now, where it's giving +1 more poison compared to what it did before, probably is a pretty good change. Next here is the Emerald, so it's going to be doing more poisoning, but it's going to be giving less of a buff to the rest of your items. And we see its brother, sister, cousin, whatever you want to call it, on the Ruby, which does something very similar, where it has a reduced cooldown, which is pretty nice. This used to have, I believe, a 10-second cooldown, which is kind of crazy. It's going to be burning less here, so burn to 2, 3, 4, 5 was 3, 6, 9, 12, but it has that faster cooldown, but also the burn buff has been nerfed here too. So kind of 2 key spam enablers, so like poison spam or fire spam, those have been nerfed here on Mak. But sandwiched in between them is an item that I think has gotten a pretty significant change here. When a buff, I would say, for the Oil Lantern now has a cooldown of 8 seconds, where it was 10, 9, 8. So it now inherently at its silver tier is going to have the cooldown of what it had at the diamond tier, and it's going to be burning for way more. So that silver tier is going to be 10, gold 20, diamond 30. So I think the oil lantern before, it was genuinely a pretty interesting item. We can pull it up here. It was interesting in that it could be a really nice payoff engine for your regen builds if you didn't want to go to the poison route. You kind of wanted to get something like a nightshade, and then that would synergize really well with your regen in the mid game. But now the oil lantern, if you get that in the mid game, it's kind of like the equivalent to what you would do with that nightshade, but for burning. And so I think that this is now kind of a nice viable way to convert your regen to damage in the mid game, because if you didn't hit the nightshade, you might be in this awkward spot where you don't have a really good way to scale your regen until you get like a damage buff or a damage enchant onto your regen scaling items. So I think that this is a pretty nice change, and one that overall will help the regen build for Mak quite a bit. And moving back here to the patch notes, continuing down, the runic double bow, cooldown 6 seconds, gets a little less damage, but that's only at the silver tier, and then it gets more after that. So a little change, don't think that's going to change the item much. Secret formula, this is a really nice regen enabler. We can go and pull that up here. So initially, again, had a much higher cooldown, but this can be a great payoff for our regen builds, in that we can get a bunch of regen, give our burn items more burn, poison items more poison. And one of the big problems with this item was how slow it was. So it was at that 10 and 8 second cooldown. Now it's at 9 and 7. Mind you, 1 second doesn't make a lot of difference in the, or it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of difference in the grand scheme of things, but truly any way to kind of like get these 10 second cooldown buffs onto our board in any faster fashion is going to genuinely make a difference on our boards, thinking about the breakpoints of the game. So love to see that. Again, don't think it's going to make it like the next super powered item, but one that'll certainly be good. Sifting pan here we can see has the regen skills no longer increase its permanent regen game, the same for the tome. So kind of this out of combat sort of stuff. Ways to buff our regen, harder to do on Mak. Viper Cane, so the poison and regen scaling has gone to 20 and 30%, was 15 and 25% before. Viper Cane, I would say, has generally been like a pretty weak item, one that can work, but is kind of hard to make work, so getting more damage or scaling off it makes a lot of sense. An interesting change here, lastly, to Weasel Pede. So it frees, the duration that it freezes an item has been reduced to a static 1 second, but the cooldown of it at higher tiers is 1 and 2 seconds lower, depending on the tier that you're on. Weasel Pede, again, is one of the enablers for kind of like the poison freeze build, but realistically, I'm not super sold that this is going to kind of like revitalize any sort of freeze archetype for Mak. And yeah, those are the Mak changes. So overall here, I'd say not a ton has changed with the character. I think there are some buffs to like the Covetous Raven and to like the Black Rose, which could be pretty interesting. Even something like this 1 second on Apothecary, I think could be kind of cool, but we'll see how that all plays out in actuality. Overall, yeah, not too much added to the character. And it's probably going to play just as it did in season 5 realistically, but we'll see how that all works out. Well, let's move on to Dooley here. So similar in terms of what has happened across the board as they're trying to make more items viable, nerf what was overpowered, that sort of thing. So starting with Alpha Ray, now has a 6 second, 7 second cooldown. Always a nice change for your rays to have them have a little lower cooldown because they care about other rays going off. The Arc Blaster now has a little bit less damage, but it also has a shorter cooldown, which is nice, but realistically not sure that that's going to change too much. Barbed Wire now changed to slow 2 items for 1 second instead of slowing 1 item for 1, 2, or 3, 4 seconds. I think this is a pretty great change in that it's also going to synergize well with another slow change we'll see here in a second. But I do think that this slowing 2 items is pretty significant for Barbed Wire, and getting more slow triggers on your items is always really important for those archetypes. So Barbed Wire, that's a pretty big buff in my book. Battery now has 5 instead of 4 ammo. Generally speaking, you're putting that on a large item that is going to be going off slowly, so this is not going to make the biggest of change, but it's always nice to have more ammo on your ammo items. Beta ray, now again, 6-second cooldown was 7-second, just like the alpha ray here. Nice change here to bulldozer, so when you use another friend, this gains 35 or 70 damage for the fight, so it's going to be gaining 5 and 10 more damage respectively at those different levels. And then it also says here, changed to having your other friends' cooldowns are reduced by 15 and 25%. So percentage-based cooldown reduction is very strong in the Bazaar. Thinking about even like when an insect wing that can like reduce an item's cooldown by 2 or 3% is pretty powerful. Having your friends go off 5% faster across the board makes for a lot of difference. So a little buff here to bulldozer, and I think it was already a pretty good item, but these little buffs can make it be even more viable in the game. Another thing that we're going to see here is kind of this like poison archetype that was on Dooley has been getting some buffs, I would say. So the Chem Snail now has a higher cooldown in that it has an 8-second cooldown instead of 6. But now we see that when you slow, you charge this 2 seconds instead of 1. So we needed 6 charges before to get this going off. Now we only need 4 charges of slow. Instances of slow. So this is a pretty nice change to Chem Snail, and I think one that could be pretty viable in the mid game. Generally speaking though, I think that burn builds are going to be overall stronger than poison builds, and Dooley has access to some of the best burn builds in the game. But if you want to go down the poison route with Dooley, it looks pretty viable here with Chem Snail, at least in the mid game. Next here, Chris Harmy Knife, damage and shield 20 was 15. Hey, love to see it. Chris gets a buff. It's only like 5 and 10 total, but yeah, I'll take what I can get. Love me some Chris Harmy Knife. The cog here, the haste duration has been changed to 2, 3, 4 seconds, was 1, 2, 3. I really like that change in that the cog was an item that I really like what it does, and that it's hasting items, and you generally want something like that on a low cooldown or Dooley's board, but you're only hasting an item for 1, 2, or 3 seconds. Getting this to diamond tier also just doesn't really feel good. So having this ability to haste for longer is pretty nice. Next up here is cool LEDs, so having an even shorter cooldown, good buff for the slow archetype again. Copper Ed, another friend here, is, I would say, pretty significant here. I know it's just like some small number tweaks, but poison going to 5 and shielding going to 25, where the poison was at 3 and the shield was at 15 before. I think that's really nice, and one that makes Copper Ed much more viable in the early game. 25 shielding is a pretty good amount with day 1 through 3. After that, you probably don't want this item, but it's where that early game shines with this Copper Ed, and having 5 poison is pretty significant as well. The crane as well is one of the kind of big payoff items that Dooley had that we didn't really see come up in a lot of builds, so I'm interested to see that if this numbers change here to having 50 more damage at silver, or 50 at gold rather, and then 300 at diamond makes a difference. These changes, we've seen them on things like the railgun and stuff like that before. This 50 and 100 damage might look small, but it can certainly add up. So having any sort of these like big number changes to large items like that are ones that we want to look out for, because this can sort of make or break the item. So it gets more exciting, but we'll have to see how it plays out. It's not definitive on if this is like the next big thing or not. Cybersecurity, I think this is a really awesome change. So now it's kind of gone back to what it was before in some ways. So it's changed to having this item has plus 50 plus 75 damage for each other weapon and tech item you have. So it's going to gain a little less damage overall. Yeah, not little, I would say pretty significant rather. At 25 less damage at gold, 50 less at diamond, but it is going to deal triple damage if it is your only friend instead of double. And compared to the nerfs on these numbers here, tripling your damage certainly way more effective than doubling your damage. So cybersecurity in the vein of what it was before, where you could kind of just completely build around it, one shot your opponents with it, put some crit chance on it with your crit core and stuff like that. This item I think is definitely back on the menu, and one that we're going to see pop up in a lot more runs. Next here, defense matrix. So has gotten a little bit of a higher cooldown, but it is going to be hasting more, which is always nice to see. Plays well in our shield builds, and we weren't really caring too much about the trigger here of it actually going off and hasting the adjacent items and stuff like that. But well, we can again look it up here. We were more so caring about this clause here, which says when you use an adjacent item, shield 10, 20, 30. So now it, is going to haste our adjacent items for more, which I think is actually kind of important in our haste or in our shield builds, because we don't normally have a lot of ways to trigger haste. We're kind of just triggering our armadillo a bunch. Maybe we'll get like a metronome or something like that. But having a nice haste enabler on the board along with our shield, I think is definitely a nice buff to this, especially because a defense matrix was something that we hadn't wanted before anyway. It's one of 3 items that have this sort of clause on it, so it's nice to have a little bit more of a buff for this build around item in one of our key builds for Dooley. Back to the patch notes here. So Dino Saddle, no longer a property. Flamethrower now has more damage on it, so instead of 2 it has 10 and 20. It makes the item more viable. I don't think it's going to make or break the item. Flamethrower was already very powerful before, and now it's still as powerful as it was, but just with a little bit more damage on it, so it's kind of nice to see. Forklift here, so it is going to have the same damage as it did at gold, and it is now going to have a little less damage, or sorry, a little bit more damage at diamond. So that's 50 more damage. Again, put more damage on large items. We'll see if that makes or breaks things, but getting a forklift to diamond tier was already difficult before, so I don't think we're going to see too much of this pop up, especially if we didn't see forklift builds really popping off before. Gamma Ray, again, like the other rays, has gone down in cooldown by 1 second, which is nice to see. Good buff for the ray build. Hamlet has been changed, so it's gotten kind of the reverse of the chem snail treatment, where it has a 6-second cooldown, but it says when you slow charge this 1 second instead of 2 seconds. So before we needed 5 triggers to get this go off, now we need 6. So it is naturally going to be going off a little bit more, and thus I think it's better in the early game, worse in the late game. So there you have it for Hamlet. Hover Tech, flying targets to 2, 3, 4 instead of 1, 2, 3. So, Hover Tech definitely, for what it wants to do, it kind of wants to spam flying, and thus this is a pretty nice change to it in that you can create a lot more flying triggers. Ice 9000, the poison has scaling a little bit more here to 15 and 30. Again, big buffs to the, or I guess I should say it is just one of the additional buffs that we have to the poison build on Dooley. So poisoning on Dooley is becoming more viable. This is a way in which we can do that, where we are scaling a little bit more here for every time we freeze, and we can go ahead and pull that up here. So with that, it says when you freeze, this gains 10-30 poison for the fight. It has a 6-second cooldown, and it's going to freeze 1 or 2 items. I think, this was in the freeze builds, one that isn't the exact payoff that you wanted. You generally wanted the nitrogen hammer, but if you don't find the nitrogen hammer, well, Ice 9000 is a decent second, and getting more buffs to that item feels pretty good. Induction Agents is now burning for 5 instead of 2. So hey, more burn. You generally wanted to play that in your builds in the early game, not the late game. So shines better in the early game, which is where you wanted it to begin with. Next one here is Isoquirk Freezer. So the cooldown now, instead of just being a static 6, goes to 6, 5, 4. And it's changed to freeze an item with a cooldown of 5 seconds or less for 2 seconds. So that's static 2 seconds instead of this scaling 1, 2, 3, which I think overall this is kind of the bigger change here, is that it can go off faster, which could be one of those keystone points in your cornerstone points, linchpin points. You all get the what I'm trying to say here. It is one of those pieces that in your freeze builds, your build can be very, very slow. It can be very powerful, but to get off the ground quickly is something that they don't always shine in doing. So having a way to enable that at the 4-second mark instead of the 6-second mark is a really nice change. So you are probably going to see more Isoquirk freezers in your freeze builds for Dooley, just because we can have it go off quicker and thus kind of start our chain of freezing much more quickly. Next here is Laser Pistol, gets a little bit more damage. So, it's a tech item and its damage, doesn't really matter too much, but getting 60 damage instead of 40 damage is at diamond tier is certainly something. Next here is Micro Dave. So The cooldown, instead of a static 8, it's at 7, 6, 5, 4, and it has a static burn 5 instead of this kind of scaling 6, 8, 10, 12. This is an interesting change. Micro Dave, I'm just trying to look at the math here. So it's going to be going off faster, but it has way less burn. You know, if you get this thing to like gold tier compared to where it was before, maybe that is fine, but at gold it would have doubled the burn. Yeah, I'm not really sure that this is going to make Micro Dave better. It might make it worse because you generally don't want to play this in the late game. Well, that's I guess if that's the case, then Micro Dave, if you're playing it in the early game, consistently burning for 5 does. Like burning for 5 faster is good, and having, because it has a lower cooldown here, but doing less burn damage overall is a pretty significant nerf. Maybe it goes well in like your ignition core builds where you can put more burn on Dave, and then that is the way to make this item better. But yeah, whenever I see cooldowns have the ability to be half of what they were before, I'd like to take a second look at that item because that is a pretty powerful effect. Next here is Miss Isles. So we have changed to when you use a core, this gains 10, 20, 30 damage for the fight and reload it, instead of when you use a core, reload this. So pretty big buff to Miss Isles. It is now maybe just like a standalone item that you build around instead of kind of having it synergize with your core, and then it had a multicast damage trigger that thus made your core go off, and that was kind of what you wanted to use it for, is you have Miss Isles go off, then your core goes off, and then vice versa, kind of ping pong back and forth. But now you just need Miss Isles. You don't need your core to be buffing up something else. So pretty nice here. I'd say this is a pretty big change, and I would definitely be excited to try out Miss Isles in my next run, see if that's a way to just kind of solo carry my runs. Next here is Monitor Lizard. So again, a nice buff where poison scaling goes from 5, 10, 15 instead of 3, 6, 9. You can pull it up here. So the Monitor Lizard hastes an item for 1 second, but it says when this is hasted, it gets that trigger. So I think Monitor Lizard, hey, maybe that's back on the menu here. If we can get a ridiculous amount of poisoning on this, this could be pretty cool. And especially being a friend, there's a lot of friends haste triggers in the friends build, and it has a pretty low cooldown at gold. And so 4, 3 at diamond, yeah, I could see Monitor Lizard doing some good work here. Next up is the Omega Ray. Again, 6 seconds instead of 7. Next up is Air Conditioner. So freeze targets to 2 and 3, and it was freeze 1 to 2 targets. Pure Conditioner, this is kind of scary. A diamond Pure Conditioner. Wow, I think that could be something pretty cool. So Pure Conditioner has been in the game for a while, and it's been kind of one of these items that was absolutely insane when it first came out, and had been reworked a bunch of times to get it to a nice balanced place. But when you use a friend or core, you charge this 1 second as an 8-second cooldown, and it's going to be freezing now 2 and 3 items. Freezing more items, creating more freeze triggers is pretty scary. So I think we're going to see some more Air Conditioner in our freeze builds on Dooley for sure. Next up here is the Plasma Rifle. So now this is at a 6-second cooldown instead of 7. And I'm not gonna lie, the Plasma Rifle was already incredibly powerful. So now that this thing is going off even faster, this item is kind of a nightmare. It's pretty scary. I always liked the Plasma Rifle builds and thought they synergized really well in transitioning your burn builds from the mid game to the late game on Dooley. So now that this payoff is even better, man, yeah, Plasma Rifle, certainly a pretty scary weapon, whether it's on your board or your opponent's board. Next up here is Power Sander. So change to haste the item to the right of this for 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice just in general to have longer haste triggers, so good buff there. Propeller Hat, if they fixed an issue where the item could only make 1 core fly at a time, so now you can have 2 cores flying. There you go. This is the next change here, the one that really excites me, is that the pylon has been changed to slow 1, 2, or 3 items for 1 second instead of slowing 1 item for more seconds. And this is exactly what this item was kind of like missing and what it wanted to do in your slow builds, which was slow multiple items. It also has here, so changed when you slow, haste an item for 1 second. So instead of 1, 2, 3. So you're going to be creating less hasting on your board, but you're going to be slowing way more. And that is what we really wanted in our slow builds. It was kind of like these numbers were the inverse problem. We didn't necessarily want to haste our board as much as we wanted to slow our opponent's board, because that slow trigger is what's actually going to scale our items. You generally don't have like a haste slow build on Dooley that's super effective unless you get like the perfect items for it. At least I didn't find it, and hey, I don't know all the builds in the game, but I know most. So now having this ability to slow 1, 2, or 3 items, I think is really nice for the pylon, and one that we're going to see pop up in a lot of slow builds, because now it's like the perfect enabler for what you're trying to do. And hey, yeah, you're creating less longer duration of haste, but you are creating 3 haste triggers at diamond tier, so that's pretty cool. Next, pyrocarbon. So the haste duration has changed to 1.52 seconds instead of 1. So yeah, we're hasting on our board. Not bad thing. Railgun, they keep going back and forth on it, but now it has higher damage, so 250 instead of 200, and then 500 instead of 400. And then now the quest is a little bit lower. It only needs 8 tech items instead of 10. And this thing has gone through so many changes and iterations, but I think ultimately, still a pretty powerful item here. Having to complete our quest with less items always makes it a little bit more powerful. So, ultimately the railgun was good before, still pretty good, and yeah, gets even better now that it is doing more damage and that it ultimately is needing less items to get online. Okay, Rex specs here. So the scaling has been changed to 8160. So we can pull that up here. So, getting more damage on the item again, not a bad thing. I think Rex specs is not generally the dinosaur payoff we wanted before, but with how they changed the dinosaurs, it's kind of the one that we were working with. But having this ability to, when you use another friend or relic, this gaining more damage, I think that opens Rex specs up to like a wider range of builds, and means that it's not just going to be only for our dinosaurs. So nice change there. Next is the rocket launcher. So it's got a little bit more burn on it. We love to see that. From now at 2468 instead of 2345. Satcom, an item that we never really wanted to play on our board, but the haste duration on it has been fixed because it had this 2225 in terms of scaling duration before. So now it's appropriately 1, 2, 3, 4 at its respective levels. Temporal navigator, there was an obsidian issue, but that has been changed and fixed. The core, so the core having a buffed cooldown, and that it is now at 654 instead of 765. And hey, any lower cooldown on your items is going to make that item more powerful. So generally speaking, I should say. But yeah, the core having lower cooldown, always interesting and nice on our cores when we have that, because they're generally going to be triggering and going off faster because our other items are getting them to go off. So the core is no exception. And yeah, nice little buff there for the core. Thermal lance, so now burn to 6, and then the burn scaling to 6, 12, 18. So man, the thermal lance now seems a little bit more interesting. Before, it just never seemed like the payoff was worth it in terms of how much you had to haste to get this thing to, be going off as much as it, or keep putting as much burn on your opponent as you wanted it to. But I think this sort of scaling, especially at gold tier, is pretty scary. And it's not trivial, or it is kind of, I was going to say it's not trivial to haste this item. It's not too difficult to haste this item is what I really want to say. So there is like a sub archetype within the burn build of hasting, and thus this enabling of the thermal lance I think is very viable, and there were ways to make the thermal lance certainly viable before, so this is a nice buff to see. Next here is a pulse rifle. Pulse rifle, I don't really know why they changed it before to what they did. I'm not sure kind of like what the vision was with that item, but it is back to more so what it was doing before. It has the tech type, which makes me feel good. I've always wanted to see that. Cooldown is now to 5 seconds, was 6543 before, and then its damage scales to what was similar before, and that it's at 10, 20, 30, 40, and it was a static 10 before. So pulse rifle is kind of similar to what it was before, essentially, which was a pretty solid item in the early and mid game. Unstable Gravwell now has a little bit of reduced cooldown, welding torch, also a bit of a reduced cooldown. Again, always nice to see some cooldown reductions. And then interestingly, the Z shield and the Z sword have been nerfed, I would say. So we're going to be shielding. It's going to be doing a static 75. It's going to be freezing only for 1 second, and it is going to have a shorter cooldown. But ultimately, I do think that like these shield numbers and these duration of freezing numbers were kind of important for the item before. So yeah, I don't know that this is going to change too much when you use the Z shield or the Z sword, to be completely honest with you, in that you weren't really using them for what they did to themselves. It was more so what they did to other items. And just pulling it up here so I can show you, this adjacent items cooldowns are reduced by 10, 15, 20%. And it having multicast, if you have a large item, that's really what you're going to be using it for. So yeah, these are just kind of like nerfs. Maybe they are buffs realistically, and I'm not seeing it. Z sword has less damage overall and has a shorter cooldown. So I don't know. Again, items that I don't think are going to be super consequential for the character, but are ones that now are a little bit different in the game. So nice to play with some different items. So overall, I think that Dooley has gotten some pretty interesting buffs here. I think certainly to the poisoning archetype and to the slowing archetype are much more viable on Dooley, just with like some slight numbers tweaks, which is pretty cool. If that's the case, you know, if we're just getting these slight tweaks to these items that make them more exciting, at least to me, I feel like that means that the game is in a pretty good and balanced point. I would say there are some outliers in the at least season 5 of the Bazaar that we saw in a lot of our runs, and generally I think the 3 kind of big points were Stelle had a really powerful early game, sort of middling mid game, and then very powerful late game. And then Pygmalien had this money tree build that you just saw everyone doing, and then Vanessa also just had like this orange Julian build that was either weapon spam or single weapon that was super powerful. And thus, I don't know that there was really a problem build or a super powerful build on Dooley that you went for every run. I thought it was one of the more balanced characters. And so now that more of the item builds and more of the archetypes are viable on Dooley, I think that's pretty good. And yeah, excited to play more Dooley in this patch than I am any other of the characters that we are going to talk about or have seen so far, just because of all these buffs. So yeah, pretty good stuff here. All right, and let's talk about Pygmalien. So Atlas Stone, they've corrected an issue, which I had seen this happen before, and I was like, what just happened? Where an Obsidian Atlas Stone just triples its damage on its output use. Yeah, I was just like, what? I did the math, I was like, this makes no sense. But anyway, Atlas Stone has been changed. Balcony now starts at gold tier. So if we talk about our value stacking builds, now it is harder to get Balcony, which is, you know, a nerf overall to the archetype and something that it honestly really needed, especially just with how easy it was to enable that archetype in this patch. Brass Knuckles now has a shorter cooldown, at least when we get it to silver and diamond, or when we get it rather to gold and diamond tier, but it also has more damage on it when we're getting it to its different tiers. It used to have a static 8, so now it has 8, 16, 24, 32, which is pretty interesting given that the Brass Knuckles has double damage. So now, you know, instead of having this 8, it is going to effectively have 16, 32, 48, 64. Yeah, I can do math. So yeah, buff to the item overall, I'd say. I don't think that's going to make or break the weapons builds, but Brass Knuckles is one of those items that you didn't necessarily want to play in your weapons build for Pygmalien for a very long time, so now that it has a shorter cooldown, I think that makes it much more viable. Cargo shorts, yeah, there was this issue where it counted items in the stash for multicast instead of its own tags, which was kind of weird, but it has been fixed. Cash Cannon now starts at 50 damage, so this represents 50 gold that we would have gotten on it. I'll pull up the Cash Cannon here. So it has this clause here: when you gain gold, this gains plus damage equal to the amount of gold gained. Again, before it just had 1, now it has 50, so that represents, you know, 50 gold that you didn't have to put on this thing before. Again, not really sure that this is going to change the item much. I think where the cash cannon is at now, this is not really what you wanted to use as your payoff for like value stacking something. Before it did a lot more damage. So yeah, still not in love with the cash cannon, but I think this is at least more viable in the mid game and could be like a passive damage dealer instead of something that we use to pay off for our value stacking. So yeah, kind of interesting there. Next up here is a rework to Cold Room. So it's going to start at silver tier instead of gold, which is cool. Has a cooldown of 6, really cool. And then also these 3 clauses here. So this is where things get a little bit different. So now it's changed from freeze 1, 2, or 3 items for 1 second to 1 and 2. So this is overall, maybe we can see it in how bazaar.gg here. You can see how that scales before 1, 2, and 3. Interesting. Yeah, I guess I'm not really sure what's accurate here. So it looks like it's going to be freezing less items overall. It also says here, when you use an adjacent tool or property, charge this 1 second. So it no longer has this clause, when an enemy uses an item, charge this 1 second. So now we are trying to be proactive instead of reactive with this item, which I think is kind of interesting, because in your slow builds, sometimes you just play with the, or when you're freeze builds rather, sometimes you just play with the cold room on board, hoping that your opponents have a lot of items that are going to be going off. And now, and when they didn't rather, it was really awkward for you because you just had this really high cooldown freezing item that didn't do a whole lot. But now being able to be proactive on the item, I think this could be pretty interesting, especially with something like the cargo shorts. If we give that the property or tool type, that goes off a bunch, then the cold room goes off a bunch. Yeah, I think that this could be pretty interesting, and it makes us think a little bit differently about how to build around this item, which I always love to see. Also, the fact that it's at silver tier, I think is pretty cool too. And the last clause here, when you freeze, gain 2, 4, 8 regen for the fight instead of 5 and 10. So, I see. This is where I messed this up. So yeah, now that it's at silver tier, it has this 1, 2, and 3, where it was only at gold tier, so it could only be 1 or 2. Anyway, yeah, this last change here. So it is going to be giving you less regen overall, but it has the ability to go off more in some cases. So yeah, different way to look at the cold room. I think that's pretty interesting. Next up here, it hurts to see, but it probably had to be done, which is that the dog has been nerfed. So it is going to be having 1 second more cooldown at each of its ranks or each of its levels. And then the quest to sell, which is, you could have to sell food before. You had to sell 20, 40, 60 food. Now you have to sell 25, 50, and 75 food or toys. So this toys tag is actually really interesting, because with the toys that we had before, or with the item that we had before, we would only really have like gumballs, truffles, and then chocolates. And that meant that you kind of had this natural gate where you go to a gumball shop, you get 10, you then want to go to like 2 chocolate shops, get 5. So, and then if you were lucky, or if you had a pitchfork, you get truffles and stuff like that. But you had these like very natural jumps to it of when you could expect to realistically get this to 20, 40, and 60. Now with the ability to sell toys, this may in some ways be easier to achieve much sooner compared to where it was before. Even though it's like 5, 10, and 15 more, we have items like Piggles that generate at when we win a fight and at the start of each day we get, or we upgrade a we upgrade a Piglet at the start of each day. They changed that. We used to get one at the start of each day as well. But when you win a fight, you get a Piggle. And then we also have the luxury Piggles that do the same thing. So we have items that naturally are going to be generating more toys. And then we can be buying and selling toys in our shops. And there's a good amount that are at bronze and silver. So we may actually be able to get our dog online a little bit sooner. But yeah, this is just the unfortunate point in that it has a larger cooldown. We'll see how this plays out. I think the dog is still going to be strong. It's definitely a fun item to build around. But yeah, maybe it turns more into a mid-game item than a late-game item, but we'll see. Next up here is Fixer Upper. So nice that it has gone back to where it was before. It has a 4-second cooldown instead of a 5-second cooldown. So Fixer Upper fans rejoice. This item is now better and is now on the money tree scaling sort of where, or the money tree timing where it's at 4 instead of 5. Next up here is Grindstone, and I think this item got a lot more interesting. So now it has a 3-second cooldown, which for the purposes of the Bazaar is very, very quick. Next, it also has this added clause here where it says if the weapon to the left has a cooldown over 5 seconds, this has +1 multicast. So just quickly going to the Grindstone here, we can see that before giving the item to the left of this 10, 20, and 30 damage, it didn't make sense because we have items like Ganjo that are going to be doing even more than that. We have weights, we have apropos chapeau, we have the showcase. There were so many good ways to scale damage onto an item, but if we're getting this thing to have +1 multicast on a 3-second cooldown, this suddenly starts to get way more interesting, and we can put this on like a flail that has a 7-second cooldown. Let's say that we have it at silver tier. Well, if we have this multicast here, we're going to be doing 20 onto that. So if that flail has again a 7-second cooldown, this has 3-second cooldown, we're going to put 20 then 40 onto the flail. The flail has a 3 times multicast. That's 120 extra damage that we just added to our board. That makes me a lot more excited compared to what we had before, especially if we can get this thing to like gold and even diamond. Yeah, even just like a 3-second cooldown tool could be very interesting for something like our cold room. I'm a lot more excited about this. I'm definitely going to be trying some Grindstone out in my like square pig runs in the future. All right, next up here, hot stones. So now as a 4-second cooldown instead of 6, it's going to be burning less and it's going to give you less regen. It had these strange sort of regen numbers before in that it starts at 1 and then it goes to 4, 7, 10. Now it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those numbers generally didn't matter a whole lot, I'm going to be frank. And it was more so that you had a small item that created a burn trigger. That was what was really interesting about it. So now with the hot stones having a 4-second cooldown, this I would say is a buff to the item because we really wanted to use it with items that cared about non-weapon items going off, like our matchbox. And we also wanted to use it with like the sauna, I think it is called. Sauna. Oh, that's a sauna. How about a sauna? There you go. Which says when you burn, you are going to heal and gain regen. And thus, having it at 6 seconds was okay, but having it at 4 seconds is much more exciting because we're creating another burn trigger. We're also just creating another item go off. So yes, the numbers here are smaller, but I do think that this is an overall buff to the item just because of how it synergizes with the other Pygmalien items in the pool. Next up here is the investment pitch event. So it was that unique Pygmalien event that we could only get on Pygmalien. And now we had this thing here before which doubled the value of our leftmost item, which was just like obscene on Pygmalien. You go there, if you have the value stacking build, you probably just won the game. You probably got an easy 10 win because you got to double the value of your biggest item and then your build is completely over the top. They've gotten rid of that. So now it says give your items +10 value, and that does not include the stash, which is I'm glad they caught that, because if that was in there and they didn't realize it, it's just like, okay, you got an extra 100 gold, buddy. You enjoy that over and over and over and over again. So that's pretty crazy. Well, I guess it would probably only do a one-time thing, right? Yeah, extra 100 gold still. That's pretty crazy. Anyway, it doesn't do that. Now it just gives +10 value to your board, which makes it so that the value stacking builds are worse. However, the like value stacking toy builds where we're using like the luxury pickles and stuff like that, I keep calling it that. I gotta make sure that I'm up to date. It's not even called the luxury pickles, the premium pickles. There you go, premium pickles, where we are creating a bunch of items that care about their value being higher, or like with the bad blockers and stuff like that, which you can pull that up here. Have +1 multicast for each item that you have value over 10. Well, if you go to this event, boom, all of your items are now over 10. So bad blocker, small buff there. I say small because the investment pitch was a pretty rare event that you could get. So, but hey, if you're in the right build and you get it, congratulations, pretty good. Next up here is the Jabalian drum. Now it hastes just for a static 2 seconds. May seem small, but truly the difference of 1 to 2 second jump here is really, really big, especially for something like the purposes of like Halidai, where we could get this to like 6 or 5 seconds. This is going to have a 2 times multicast, so we get this to go off at a gold tier. It's going to be hasted for 4 seconds because of how the drum works now. Thus, it's going to be having a half cooldown, and so now this thing is perma-hasted. Things like the yo-yo had a 4-second cooldown. Now this, when it goes off, it's going to be going off again. So hasting is going to be essentially halving the amount of time that our items go off, and thus we can look at all these items going off just doubly as quickly because of that. And that makes all the breakpoints on Pygmalien's small weapons work so much better. And thus I think that this is a pretty drastic change to the drum build, and it may look small, but just for how the breakpoints work in the game, this is a pretty big one. It does also do a little less damage. It's weird. It was at 6 and 9 before. That's so wild. Why was it like that? Now it's at 5 and 10. Anyway, this I think is a pretty big buff to the drum, and so I'm excited to play more drum builds, because when you got a gold tier, it's like, yeah, this is exciting because I can maybe get this to diamond tier, and then, you know, also it obviously is a very powerful item, but it still needed just like a little bit more work to make it the best it could be and make it really synergize with your run. Now it just synergizes out the gate and all the breakpoints work out well. So yeah, excited for the Pygmalien drum here. Keychain, they corrected this enchant target. Land Scraper now is at a 5-second cooldown instead of 7. I think that's really big. Means that we're not going to be just looking at like the money tree and the fixer-upper builds in terms of value stacking, because this thing going off at 7 seconds was just way too slow before. So 5 seconds makes it much more viable. I don't think it's what we want to do, but it's what we can do, and it still is a pretty powerful item. Luxury Tents has also been nerfed in that it still is going to have that doubling trigger for all of your healing items, but it is instead of healing for 25 and 50% of your max health when you would die, now it gains 10 to 20. So pretty significant nerf there in terms of what it was doing, but its main purpose of giving your healing items and regen items, I think they might have changed the regen items actually, but at least your healing items +1 multicast is still intact. Yeah, this is just for your heal items and what you really wanted to utilize before this item. But yeah, this was a nice little added benefit. So Luxury Tents, it's still good. It has been nerfed, but it is still good. Model ship here has also been changed. So it starts at silver. Its cooldown is been reduced overall. So now instead of having a 5-second cooldown, it goes to 5, 4, 3, and it's going to be shielding less. The thing about the model ship before is sometimes you wanted it on your board for the purposes of like your toys and your yo-yos and things of that nature, but you also kind of wished that it had a lower cooldown just to create another shielding trigger. So we get our wish here, or maybe it's just my specific wish, in that the model ship now is going to be going off at a pretty decent interval here at that 4 and 3 second. That's pretty fast. Next up, I think we were all looking to see how would they change the money tree. This is the big question going into season 6 for your Pygmalien builds, and the answer has a 5-second cooldown. Not a 4-second cooldown, but a 5-second cooldown, and that's it. So if you like the money tree builds, they're still good. They're not as good, but they are still good. And I think I personally would have probably liked to see a little bit more of a change here to this, but hey, maybe 1 second cooldown difference on this thing is going to make all the difference. I think what was really tough about this before was that you could get money tree, which you still can, at bronze. Then you can find a lot of bronze enablers like a cash register or vaults and things of that nature, or piggy banks to scale this pretty quickly and get a lot of change very quickly. And then this is just kind of locks you into a certain build where you say, okay, I could like try and figure out a different build in the game, but realistically, if I'm served a money tree at bronze tier on day one, I'm just going to go for a money tree build if I want to get 10 wins. And mind you, that's how I play. I'm always trying to get the maximum amount of wins that I can. And, you can play the game differently and try and, just have the most fun and whatever, and like, pivot and do other things. But for people like myself that are really just trying to maximize on wins, and that's how they have fun with the game, the money tree, it's not been changed in a significant way to where we're going to deviate from that plan. I would again like to see a little bit more. Maybe it heals a little bit less. Maybe you don't get a change at the start of each day, something like that. But money tree ultimately still in the menu and still something that we're probably going to be playing a lot with, but it just has a higher cooldown. Next up here is the Piggles launcher. So a pretty fun enabler for our small Piggles / toys archetype. And it is now at a 7-second cooldown instead of 8. So hey, nice little buff there. Regal Blade, I was interested in how they were going to change this item. They kind of hit it in the two ways that I wanted them to, which is that it's been buffed in terms of the quest requirements for this item. Now when you scale it up, you need 12, 10, and 8 instead of 12, 12, 12. So what I assume is that if you have bought, let's say like 10 properties and it's at silver, well, when you level this up to gold, you're just going to instantly meet that quest. That's what I presume is going to happen if it works out how it is listed here. And then it also says the third quest now scales damage based on all items instead of just properties, which is really good because sometimes you were on the Regal Blade builds, I guess I should say generally with Regal Blade builds actually, you're not playing them with properties. You have a Regal Blade and you're probably playing that with a lot of weapons. So now you have this ability where you bought and sold all these properties. Well, you're not really utilizing this clause at all. So now it scales with the value of all your items, which feels pretty good. Okay, next up here is the slingshot. So that starts at 2 ammo instead of 1. Pretty inconsequential realistically, but gets a little bit better in the early game, I'd say. Generally don't want this on our late game boards, but here we are. Next up here is the spiky shield, which I'm curious to see what you all think about this item. Because the spiky shield before, it having a 9-second cooldown kind of synergized well with some of the items that we had in the game where we would kind of do a 1-2 punch, where we would have something like our silk scarf go off at 8 seconds, and then we'd have our spiky shield go off at 9. But with the change to the silk scarf, we can pull that up here, it was going off at a different timing when we leveled it up, and we were pretty incentivized to level it up. So it having now that 8-7-6-5 second cooldown means that we didn't really have this this direct synergy with the cooldown timings of the spiky shield. So now it's going to be going off quicker, which was always kind of this tension that you had with the spiky shield. And you had this like fixer-upper build where you got a huge amount of shielding from your fixer-upper, then you had your spiky shield to do the damage, and you were always just hoping you could get to that 9 seconds and that your opponent didn't burn through all your shields or whatever it might be, and then you go off and it one-shots your opponent. Now with it going off much quicker, I think the spiky shield is a much more viable item, and we'll probably see a return of spiky shield shielding builds as well because of it. So pretty exciting change there. Next up here is textiles. So it's changed to when you heal with an item, charge adjacent non-healing items 1 second. Charge an adjacent non-healing item 1 second instead of charging both of the adjacent items. This is a pretty big change. I think textiles was one of the most powerful pig items that we had in season 5. And this is still a very powerful clause, and I think it's one that we are still going to be utilizing, and the textiles is still going to be good, but now that it's going to be half as good, it definitely knocks it down a peg in terms of its viability. So we aren't just going to instant pick up textiles every time we see it, but if we do have the ability again with like our money tree, a money tree build where we would be creating a lot of healing triggers from our money tree, and we're charging our laser security system. That's all we really wanted to charge before. So now that we are, or I guess I should say it's still viable in that build, but outside of that is where it starts to get a bit worse when we're putting it next to, or we're utilizing it with cargo shorts and stuff like that, that would create a lot of healing triggers. So yeah, ultimately probably a good nerf overall to textiles because it was a little too powerful, but ultimately still a viable item. Now, moving on here, so truffles lowered enchant numbers. I'm not exactly sure what that means. If I'm going to be transparent with you, we'll have to see. Next up here, the Tusked Helm. So the cooldown is now at 9,876, where it was 10 before. Yeah, the Tusked Helm, man, it was just a really slow item. Always had been slow, and now that it is at a faster cooldown, makes it much more viable and something that we would probably be a little bit more excited to play in our damage, our weapons, and shielding builds. Something like a 28-hour fitness, I think, makes a lot of sense with the Tusked Helm more than it was before. Also, the damage and shields are now at a static 10 and they don't increase, which it's not really what we were utilizing before. We were utilizing it really for the fact that it was both a shielding item and a weapon item. So the Tusked Helm looks like a buff to me. Vineyard also now has a 5-second cooldown instead of a 6-second cooldown, which is nice to see. So again, some of our other value stacking properties are coming to fruition here in terms of their viability. So Vineyard is one that I'd be a lot more excited to build around at 5 seconds instead of 6. Lastly, here is a huge change. So the VIP pass, the cooldown has been changed to 5 seconds. Looks like a buff. Haste duration changed to flat 2 seconds. That seems definitely like a buff. But this last clause here, value increased, changed to 468, but it's only for the current fight. So before it would give you that one permanent value every time that your property went off. Now when your property goes off, it gains even more value, but we aren't going to be scaling it. So what you could do before is you could take, again, something like your money tree or your fixer-upper. You go into a fight where you know that there's no way that the NPC can kill you, and then you just farm it, essentially. You just put no damage on your board, and you just get as many property triggers as you can to scale your value stacking item out of player combat. Player versus player, I should say. So the VIP pass now, you know, it is going to be something I think we're going to utilize in our value stacking builds. It's not going to be our go-to, and it's also not going to, I believe, have this added clause here, and we can maybe check where it would also gain that value on itself. So it was an item that ultimately also created a bunch of value on it, so you could get it, you know, to 100 gold and sell that off and buy whatever you wanted to. So now it doesn't do any of that anymore. So pretty big nerf to this item, and I could see a world where we are playing it, but because realistically also hasting adjacent properties for 2 seconds is still really good, and adding value to them is still pretty good, but we're just not going to be utilizing it for the purposes of scaling our items. So yeah, overall Pygmalien, I would say we had some interesting changes, some buffs, some nerfs. When their goal here of making other builds more viable across characters, I would say that, you know, something like the spiky shield that we see is pretty interesting. Something like the hot stones is like interesting, and the cold room is interesting, but there's not a ton of changes here to Pygmalien that are like super exciting. That being said, I think that the character was in a really good place before with their numbers and with the balance outside of the money tree builds. So having less incentive to go into money tree is nice. However, we're still probably going to be playing money tree too. So we'll see how it all pans out again. But my initial take is that Pygmalien, there have been some changes, nerfs to the value stacking build, but ultimately the character was in a good spot before outside of that build and remains to be in a pretty good place. All right, next up here is Stelle. So we have a decent amount of changes here to Stelle. Again, their goal was to make Stelle a little bit more balanced overall. So let's see how this all pans out. Firecrackers, ammo to 5 was 6. So it's going to be destroying itself a little bit sooner, so looks like a buff to me. Flare gun, they corrected an issue where this didn't correctly count as an ammo item, which is interesting. I don't really know. I've never seen that come up. Flashbang has been nerfed, so now it's going to be slowing for 2, 3, or 4 seconds, where it was 3, 4, and 5 before. Flashbang was incredibly powerful, and you probably just played it on your board regardless of if you were a slow build because of how powerful it was with this slowing. So the nerf to that, it's still slowing for a pretty good amount. It's still going to be creating a lot of slow triggers, so it doesn't completely nerf that archetype. It's just going to be slowing for a less amount of time. Something I like to see here, probably not enough. I would even have considered making that like 1, 2, and 3. Because this is still a very high amount of slow. We're doubling the CD of our opponent's items. So yeah, Flashbang nerfed, but not nerfed into the ground. Hanger now starts at diamond, and the cooldown is to 1 second, was 1.5. So we can pull up the hanger here. And that's how you spell hanger. Okay, so all non-vehicle, non-tool cooldowns are increased by 1 second. Your vehicle and tool cooldowns are decreased by 1 second. Hanger did contribute to a lot of very powerful, I wouldn't say broken, but just incredibly powerful builds where you were playing with vehicles and tools, and you could create some pretty quick loops with that. So a nerf to that does make sense to me, and it's starting at diamond tier means that it's much, much more difficult to achieve or to find. Still also kind of had a glutton of large static ability or just like large other item enabling large gold tier items before. So a lot of items that are doing something very similar. So having one that goes to diamond tier, I think is just good for the character in that you kind of were spoiled for choice with this sort of effect that you had. So a nerf, but I think it's best overall for the character. Hammer now has also been nerfed, so you can pull up the hammer. It is now going to be checking to see that we bought 10 tools instead of 8, and then once we do that, we use this to sell and upgrade our leftmost item. Probably a good change overall in that this didn't really have any gatekeeping to it. Yes, you had to buy 10 tools or buy 8 tools, but it didn't say small item or medium item. It was just whatever your leftmost item is, upgrade it. So yeah, it started at gold, but this was a really, really powerful item that you basically always wanted to pick up on Stelle just because of the opportunity where you could upgrade your leftmost item. And 8 was already a lot. 10 being even more makes this less viable. So you really have to think now, I think, when you have this hammer in your shops, do you really buy it? Do you think you're going to have the gold to get to 10? So I think that's a good nerf overall. Headset, they corrected an issue where several of the items in chance also triggered on stops flying, which I really appreciate because you would have like double triggers going off from your enchanted headset. So this is really appreciated in that sense because it's a knockdown a peg in terms of power level. Hydraulic squeezer now correctly charges all of your flying items instead of 1. So now appropriately does what it's supposed to do. The lava roller, so now it destroys and then it burns. So we can pull up the lava roller here. So it destroys an adjacent item for the fight, and then it burns and says when you destroy an item, double this item's burn for the fight. So what I imagine will happen is you destroy that item, and then it's going to burn for 60. So that's pretty good. An item that I've never seen work on any person's board in the entirety that I've played in Season 5, I'm going to be honest, but I do like that it's getting buffed for the fact that we could try it and try and play around something like the lava roller, so I think that could be pretty cool. Anyway, next up here, launch tower. So now it's been changed to the first time you use an item each fight, all your vehicles start flying, and was at the start of each fight. So having all of your items start flying at the start of the fight meant that all your like flying triggers or items that cared about flying triggers were instantly turned on, and thus your board was kind of off to the races really, really quickly. And that was kind of a problem with Stelle, because the Stelle in the late game could be outscaled by other Vanessas, Maks, Pygmaliens, but it's the fact that she's so quick to get going with items like this meant that she commonly went underneath a lot of the other characters. So having it be on this when you use an item instead of at the start of a fight is actually a pretty significant nerf to the character overall, and nerf to the launch tower for sure. It's still very potent and powerful, but it just means that I think more of those late game stealth fights are going to feel a bit more fair if you're going up against her. Next up here is the lightning rod. So they corrected an issue where the enemy and player triggers were on different internal cooldowns, which is pretty interesting in that it could, I guess, kind of zap on off of the cooldown cycle, that internal cooldown cycle of dealing damage, so it could produce damage more quickly than it would normally be able to do. So now that looks to be a nerf to the item. You can quote me on that, but unsure that it is completely correct. But from what I'm reading here, that's what it seems to be, in that this item can now do less damage in terms of how quickly it does it. Next up here, we talked about this at the beginning, but the lunchbox no longer gains regen or passive regen from your skills. So this is just going to have that static permanent gain that it had before. Orbital Polisher, this is a pretty needed one, I would say, where now it needs 150 items to fly instead of 99. So we're going to be seeing a lot less shiny items on our opponent's boards. I think this is still not, I was going to say it's not high enough, but 150 may genuinely be high enough to where we are going to be thinking twice when we get the Orbital Polisher. Generally, you could find this at like day 1 and just hold it onto it until you get to like day 8 or 9, and you probably incidentally had 100 flying triggers if you were in any build that had some semblance of flying. So yeah, I think this is kind of like a problem item for Stelle in some ways, in that it just really consistently makes for a lot of shiny items, and shiny is very powerful in the character because the character cares a lot about triggers. And if you have a small item that is only on your board to do triggers, doubling those triggers gets to be very powerful for what you're trying to do. So I'm glad that this has been nerfed, and we'll see if this is enough for that item. All right, next up here is Oxygen Mask. So this is kind of what we're going to see here with a couple of these items, in that the survivability items on Stelle have kind of been buffed. So Oxygen Mask now is going to gain more regen, and then it's going to go 3, 6, 9, 12 instead of 2, 4, 6, 8. So nice little buff there to the Oxygen Mask, which honestly wasn't an embarrassing item before. It says when you shield, you're going to gain that much regen, and we could find ways to shield on Stelle for sure, and like create a bunch of shield triggers. So this is a pretty cool item, and one that I certainly am excited to try in more of my runs. Private Runabout, this was one that they certainly had a target on when they made this patch statement, what they're going to be trying to do, and it has been nerfed here. So it now starts at silver tier, or when it started at silver tier before, but its cooldown at silver tier is 9, and it goes 9, 8, 7 instead of a static 7. It's going to be doing a little bit more damage at silver tier than it does 100, but it is not going to gain any more damage. So I think these are good changes overall. Private Runabout, the problem with it was really the 7-second cooldown, and we can pull the item up so you can see what I'm talking about here. Private Runabout, there we go. So 2 times multicast, this is what really matters though. This item's cooldown is reduced by 1 second for each flying item that you have. And so if we're at 7 seconds, we just need 7 flying items on our board. We have 10 slots on our board. It's not that hard to create 7 flying items on our board. So this has a 1 second cooldown. It's just going off repeatedly. Very, 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 very powerful in the early and mid game. And because it's a silver tier large item, we can find it relatively early on. And it was very hard to defeat Private Runabout builds. It was just kind of disproportionately powerful compared to what other characters had access to at that given point in the game. So nice to see that this has been changed, and thus, yeah, having a 9-second cooldown, very difficult to have 10 items on your board that are flying if it has a 9-second cooldown, because the Private Runabout takes up 6 slots. So, or not 6 slots, 3 slots. There you go. Yeah, it takes up 3 slots. So you have it, and then you have 7 other slots to work with. That's much harder to make that all kind of come together in terms of its flying. So yeah, nice to see a nerf to the Private Runabout. I think it's still viable, but it's certainly just not as powerful as it was before. Next up here is the Rivet Gun. So now has an increased cooldown, and then the self-charge is now at a static 2 seconds. So we can pull up the Rivet Gun here. It's one that I have seen be pretty powerful, and the fact that it's a tool meant that it went into your tool builds pretty consistently here. It's going to be charging the item to the left of it. It's also going to be getting charged pretty consistently, but it in itself could be pretty problematic with these like tool cooldown reduction items, like these static items that we saw that are going to be reducing the cooldown of your tools. So the rivet gun getting a nerf is certainly very welcome. Very powerful still, and one that we're going to be certainly wanting to utilize, especially at diamond tier. I think this item is going to be very strong in that it is not going to be charged as much, but it's going to be close to where it was before. So yeah, rivet gun nerfed, but still certainly very good. Sandbags here, so now this has 2, 3, 4 vehicles start flying from 1, and it says when a vehicle starts flying, charge it 1 second from 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be charged overall much less, but it is going to give more vehicles flying, which is pretty nice. Having this ammo clause here is kind of interesting as well, because Stelle does have some skills and things of this nature that do care about ammo, but the fact that it has a 4-second cooldown on it, and it's going to create a lot of flying triggers on your board, means that sandbags can potentially be like the only flying enabler that you need for your vehicles, which is nice compared to where it was before. And it is maybe something that you don't really need to get off twice in a run, where you just need it to go off once, and then this charging piece to it is something you don't care about too much. So, you know, overall, I'd say the item is kind of in a weird spot in terms of what it does. I'm not sure like what the design space it's trying to fill, but it having this ability to just give 3 vehicles flying on a 4-second cooldown is probably all you need at this point. I don't know, this charge piece is really going to even come up a lot, especially because it has a pretty low cooldown to begin with. All right, next here is Siren, which now has a lower cooldown, so it's at 5, 6, 7, and then it's slow and haste duration to 1 second. So ultimately a buff for the Sirens here. And this is an item that I spoiled in the last season, which is always fun to see. So yeah, lower cooldown feels really good. It's going to be slowing a lot more, hasting a lot more. I think this item was already almost playable, and it's certainly something that could contribute to your slow and hasting builds in a meaningful way. But it having this this piece here where it's actually slowing for like a full second, hasting for a full second is really nice. You get this on a 3 times multicasts, and then a I'm just reading this 5, 6, 7. Hold on a second. What? What? Okay. So its cooldown is going to increase as it levels up, but its slowing and hasting also increases. So you never want to level this up. Is that what am I missing here? I read this before and I was like, oh yeah, 5, 6, 7, whatever. But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, what the heck is this, man? Why would you ever want to level this thing up? What are we doing here? I don't know. I can't think about that. I gotta move on. Solar drone, no longer a view. I'm still stun locked. 5, 6. What are you doing? Why is this not reversed? Is it reversed? Is it a typo? Is it a typo that's also on the data scraping side? What am I missing here? Okay. Anyway. Solar drone. Let's pull that. So no longer a vehicle. And with that, it also has a lower cooldown. So this item was actually kind of interesting before, in that it could create a lot of shielding triggers, which is pretty cool. But yeah, something that is not super consequential. It's just 5, 6, 7. Anyway, squirrel suit. Having a squirrel moment here. So squirrel suit, the regen, 10, 15, 20 compared to 6, 8, 10, which is pretty insane jumps in terms of regen. With this item having this ability where it says when this starts flying, gain 10, 15, 20 regen, that's a lot of regen. And it's at silver tier. It's going to make itself stop flying. When you use an adjacent flying item, this starts flying. I think the squirrel suit genuinely might be kind of cracked. I think that this is a really powerful regen enabler that we're going to see more of from skilled players who are understanding how to take full advantage of that. So yeah, definitely look out for that squirrel suit. Next one is here, the big one. So we have a new powder keg. The big one says, we can pull it up here. When Cooldown 14-12 seconds. Destroy this. When this is destroyed, deal damage equal to 40-50% of your enemy's max health. So unfortunately, it doesn't have like the cooldown or charging aspect of what the powder keg did. But if we can put crit chance on the big one, boom, we have a new powder keg. 12-second cooldown, one shot your opponent. So yeah, big one. It's the new powder keg kind of. It's like way worse than the powder keg because you have to wait 12 seconds for it to happen. But if you get to 12 seconds and you can get crit chance on this thing or make it obsidian, which is much rarer now, it's going to be pretty good. So there's that for us. And then the wrecking ball. I've never been able to make this item work, but I've tried so many times. The cooldown is now 20 and it was 22, which this item I think can be pretty cool. It is going to deal damage equal to 20-30% of your enemy's max health. It's going to destroy an item and says when this starts flying, charge this for 4 seconds. So I think it has the potential to be very strong. It's just getting it to 20 seconds is the hard part, and mainly doing it like more than once, because you're destroying one item is probably not going to be enough. I still want to make this item work. I'm going to try and make this item work, and any buff to that feels pretty good. Okay, so those are the Stelle changes. Overall, again, their goal was to nerf this item and overall make Stelle a little bit more balanced and in line with the other characters. I think they accomplished that. I don't know that they did everything that they needed to do, because I think that really the problematic item for Stelle is Molten Ball Blaster. This is a very easy item to enable, and it is also a very powerful item that we can get at bronze tier. I think that they needed to change this item and they didn't touch it. And this was really the thing that kind of stymied you from trying to do anything else. If I see a Molten Ball Blaster, if I can get it to silver tier, I'm just going to play tools until like day 7. So I think that this is the item that really needed to be touched. I think additionally here, is it the Gatling gun drone? Gatling gun, no. Aerial turret, this is the one. The aerial turret and the Molten Ball Blaster are like the builds that I see on Stelle on bronze tier really consistently, and I would really love to see some build diversity in the character. The problem that I see with Stelle though is that there are a lot of items that enable other items and they don't do much on their own. So you kind of end up playing a lot of very similar builds early on, or you're playing with the same payoffs because there's just not that many payoffs. It's not like Vanessa, which has, or even like Dooley, which has a lot of individually powerful iphones that then can also synergize with other items. It's items that are like the Flysicle, which we can look at here, which just says Flysicle, there we go, which just says an item starts flying. So we have just so many of these different items that do a very specific thing, but they themselves are like not an exciting payoff. And so we're kind of in this position where Stelle in the early game feels very similar with a lot of different runs because there's just not that many viable payoffs that you have for your engine building that Stelle wants you to do. I think the general direction for Stelle as a character is that you're building kind of a big payoff engine. You have one item that is going to do all of your damage, and you're going to create a lot of triggers to get there. And with that, you just have less items in the early game because you can only get bronze tier or silver tier items. So your early game looks very similar every time. And that being said, that's why I think we either need more items for the character, or like this sort of item needs to be changed, or there just needs to be more payoffs for the character in the early game. I played a bunch of Stelles and Stelle runs and against a lot of Stelles, and I really just do not see a lot of build diversity early on within the character, and I don't think that has changed with this patch. I think that we have gotten certainly what they were intending to do, which is nerf some of the specific archetypes, or like, I mean, really it's just items like Private Runabout, and then make her kind of on par with the other characters in terms of power level at the different points in the game. But I really feel like there's more that needs to happen to the character in terms of build diversity for her to like feel fun to play. I get really tired of playing Stelle really quickly. I get really tired of facing Stelle very quickly. just because I see the same builds pop up time and time again. And it's like visually interesting to watch, and that there's a lot of stuff happening and there's a lot of triggers and big number go up, but it's not that fun to play or play against when you just face the same build every time, which is also why I like really disliked the money tree builds and Julian builds for Vanessa, because it just felt like I was playing against the same build every time and there wasn't much incentive to go in a different direction. So Stelle, yes, they did kind of fix some of the things that they wanted, but I don't know that those things are what they really needed to fix in terms of making this character feel fresh and interesting, and also good for the overall game of the Bazaar. Anyway, continuing on, so let's talk about Vanessa. So Vanessa got some pretty interesting changes, I'd say. So Anchor haste duration changed from 2 was 2 to 4. Its cooldown is now decreased from 12 to 10. So Anchor was a pretty cool item, I'd say, before. In that, let's clear these tags here and then take this away here. In that, it was sort of like a sleeper item, in that it has this when you use an adjacent item. This is hasted for 2 seconds, so it can go really nicely into your haste builds. And it also does a pretty good amount of damage, 20 to 30% of our enemy's max health. So it scales really nicely. If we can put crit chance on it, it does a ton of damage. I always really liked the Anchor, and it was one of the items that I was like, how can I fit this in my build to make it more interesting? So it's nice to see. Blowgun has a shorter cooldown, which is awesome. Blowgun is a really cool item, in that we are converting our poison, or converting our damage to poison. So I really like the blowgun. This also, I will say, makes the temple fight where you fight the blowgun really scary, and you're probably never going to click that one now, because this is a lot of damage. That item, or that encounter now, is super difficult. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be fighting the blowgun trap. Watch out. Anyway, Butterfly Swords has a lower cooldown. Not an item I never really utilized a lot, but it could be powerful. Less cooldown makes it certainly more powerful. Cyber Size, the next piece here. So this is an item that I certainly want to see changes to, because I thought it'd be really interesting if they buffed it appropriately, and I think they might have. So cooldown now at 3 seconds was 5 seconds. Damage now a little less. It's in fact going to be doubly less. So damage is now 10, 20, 30, 40. But that's not why we were using this item. It has this invulnerability charges, which is really interesting. So now it has 2, 3, 4, 5 invulnerability charges instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's pull this item up. So Cyber Size, it says the first 2, 3, 4, 5 times you crit with this each fight, you take no damage for 1 second. So having invulnerability frames in basically playing Dark Souls in the Bazaar, that's really powerful, and one that can make or break a lot of fights and runs. And it's just a different way to play the game. It is one that we don't really see too often in terms of invulnerability triggers, and it makes for some pretty interesting like tension in your fights with PvP, because you're like, did I crit at the right time? Oh man, like I negated their big attack. It's fun to watch, and it makes it so that you have like more variance in your PvP fights, which I think is really cool. It's not so much consistent unless you can get a lot of crit chance on your board, but it's just super fun to play with, and I think that is really awesome to have. And when you can mix fun to play with, and you can mix viability together in a way that's not overpowered, that's like the perfect sweet spot to be. And I'm really interested to see if the Cyber Sight is that, especially with its cooldown reduction. I think that this could be super fun. So yeah, definitely gonna be playing with some of that item. Next up here, Dark Water Angler has been buffed in that it's not at a static 8 seconds, so it's going to 876. This was already a pretty nice slow enabler before, or slow payoff I should say, in that it gets charged every time you slow. So you are going to have a lot more viable Dark Water Anglerfish builds that are going to be coming up here in the next season with Vanessa, and I think that's pretty nice. I think the slow builds, if you can't find that key payoff item, it feels super bad. So having one like the Dark Water Anglerfish that can start at silver tier feels pretty good. Electric Eels now does 100 damage instead of 50. Oh man, I just remember the patch where Eels was super overpowered, and so I get scared every time I see numbers changes like this. But at the same time, more viable builds for Vanessa is always a nice thing in that we can play with a lot of different items. I think Vanessa as a character is maybe one of the most fun that you can play in the Bazaar, and by that I mean that she has the most build variety and build viability. There are a lot of different good builds on Vanessa that you can play. There's a lot of different fun synergies that you can mix and match, and it seems like you don't just get the same thing every time. So having more items, more viable on her, I think is pretty nice. Next up here is the flagship. So this is a really interesting change. So now it's going to have static 50 damage. It's not going to scale its damage as we get more levels on it, but it also has a shorter cooldown. And that was kind of always the problem with flagship. And I say problem, this item was incredibly strong and has been for its entirety of its time in the game as a one item or one weapon payoff. But having this high cooldown meant that you could sometimes just kind of get an opponent who goes underneath you. But now with it having less damage, I think that that's not really a problem. It going off sooner is way more important because in your one weapon builds, you can have something like Orange Julian that can make up for this damage increase. And thus you are not really sweating that. You just want your flagship going off, especially if you have something like the Crow's Nest, which is going to give your flagship lifesteal. Then your flagship is just going to be able to have a bunch of different multicast on it and kind of make sure that you don't just die straight away in the fight. So I think that this is a nice buff to one weapon builds. Next is the Kusarigama. This is now at a 5-second cooldown, which is pretty nice. It no longer slows, so it doesn't enable itself, but the scaling of the damage that it gives to your other items has increased by a pretty decent margin. It's increased by 2, 4, 6. Yeah, I can do math. I'm proving it here live. So this item is one that I think was a nice slow payoff before. It meant that you didn't necessarily have to find like the lighthouse, or you didn't have to find the manta shrimp. You could just kind of take one of your weapons that was already on board on a pretty short cooldown, put some slow items on the board or some crit items, and have this scale it pretty well. I always like this item, and it's gotten even better, so I'm excited to see that. Next up here is the Manta Shrimp. So Manta Shrimp has always been pretty slow. Now it's at 9 seconds, which is certainly a nice buff to see. I don't think it's going to make or break the item, but having it go off a little bit sooner is certainly a buff. Same for Mr. Richardson and Old Salt Claw here. They were at that 7-second cooldown. Now they're both at 6, so a nice little buff there. And then this is the item that I really wanted to see changed, and it is the Orange Julian. So its cooldown has been increased to 11, 10, 9, in that it starts at silver tier now, so it is going to have 1 second more cooldown. You can't get it at bronze tier. This is an item that I think is problematic, and I'm not sure that this is enough, but we'll see. The thing with Julian is it's a really low opportunity cost. You can find this on day 1, and now you guess you can't, because you can't put it to silver. But you find it on day 1, you just keep it in your backpack, and you passively are going to be generating damage on this thing. Let's pull it up for those who may be unfamiliar. So it says your weapons gain plus 10 damage for the fight, but it has this clause here: when you gain gold, permanently increase the damage bonus of this item by the amount of gold gained. So you keep it in your backpack, it's passively going to be gaining all this damage here. And then it meant that you didn't really have to deviate from your weapons builds, and you had a pretty straight shot to go either into a one weapon build. Man, I sounded like a robot there. Anyway, you could go into a one weapon build, or you could go into a weapon spam build, and no matter how you cut it, Orange Julian was producing a ton of damage for your board and was probably the best way to enable your weapons builds in the late game. It just slotted into so many different things so easily for such little amount of commitment. And, you know, if you're getting this for 4 gold early on, well, cool. If you never used it, you spent 4 gold for the opportunity of having one of the best builds in the game. And that was, you know, not having to do anything for that, and it passively generating that meant that Vanessa could be just very consistent in the late game with their ability to just use Orange Julian on whatever board they had, and it was probably more powerful than any of the other synergies that they could generate. So the fact that this is at silver tier means that you are going to be putting less money and thus less damage onto it. And also it having a higher cooldown means that you have to work harder to enable it. I think those are two really key things here. I think also that Orange Julian with these changes is still going to be viable. I'm hoping that it is in a position where it is just not seen in every single run. I think with it starting at silver tier, that makes sense, but I really make no exaggeration when I say every single run of the Bazaar that I have played in the past week, when the end of season 5, I have faced at least one opponent with this, and oftentimes that has been like 3 or 4. If I faced Vanessa, it's generally like I have seen so many Vanessas with the Orange Julian that I just am sort of personally sick of it, but I also recognize that, that's just my bias in terms of what I want to see in the game, but I really want to see diversity. And if this is such a low opportunity cost to enable the item and to keep it, then you're probably going to see it in a lot of runs. So having a higher opportunity cost, having it harder to enable, I think is all good. And I really hope that it gets this item into the place where we don't see it in every single run. Okay, all that said, let's keep moving. Pufferfish. The cooldown is now at 876, so this is pretty nice in that it was a static 8 before. So now when you level the pufferfish up, it's going to be pretty meaningful for scaling your poisoning in the late game. So the problem with a lot of pufferfish builds before is that they kind of plateaued, and now with this ability to go off even faster, if we can put something of like these enchants on it, I think that this is going to be pretty nice for us. So I like the pufferfish change here. Buffing this item I think is pretty smart, because we were at some point in the Bazaar, all we saw were pufferfish builds and one weapon builds, but I still think having, again, more viable builds on Vanessa, because we have such a large item pool for the character, means that there's a lot more fun ways to play. So I'm certainly here for it. Sea Dog Saloon also gets a nice cooldown reduction, gets 1 second knocked off it, so it was 6-5 before, now it's at 5-4 now. Stealth Glider, so this is an interesting one. It is re-enabled. They took it out of the game, but now it's back. They corrected an issue where enchanted stealth gliders invulnerability did not break properly. So I, transparently, when this item came out, I was taking a break from the game, and so I don't even know the full story of it. So I'm not going to pretend like I do. But this is us looking, or me looking at it kind of from, not the first time, but trying to really suss out what it's going to be like in Season 6. So it says you take no damage for the first 8 to 10 seconds of each fight, or until you use an item. So that's pretty interesting. I had seen this item before and I didn't really know how to evaluate it, and I think that that continues. So I'm not gonna try and speculate too much on this for you all, as I try and give you all like as much like personal yet factual content that I can, and try and give you good opinions, I suppose. Good opinions backed up by data. And the Stealth Glider is just something that I don't really have a good read on. I think that in the right builds, this can be really nice. The fact that it takes up 3 slots, though, is a little much, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I'll let the people who are more experienced speak on this more. Submarine is the next step here. So it says damage has been nerfed to static 50. So it's kind of like what we saw with the flagship, but its cooldown is now reduced as well. So instead of a static 4, as we level it up, it's going to go to 4-3-2, which I think is super, super cool. Having a 2-second submarine sounds super fun to play with, and an item that is kind of like what we wanted it to do before when our one weapon builds, which is go off as fast as possible. So now this adds another item. We saw so many one weapon builds that were just like only katanas, and now we have more than just a katana to play with. We have the submarine, we have the flagship, which, mind you, we saw these items before, but now that I think they're even more powerful because of it, I'm sweating this damage even less on the submarine, just because a 2-second cooldown is so obscene. Next up here is the torpedo. So the max ammo is now to 1. Damage scaling is now 40, 80, 120. So it's a little bit higher than it was before, at least when we get it to gold and diamond tier. I think that this is a good change. The torpedo before having 2 max ammo meant that you really didn't have to put any sort of an ammo or reloading enablers onto the board. You just kind of naturally were able to trigger it a bunch, and we can pull it up here. Torpedo, which says when you use another aquatic or ammo item, this gains damage, and if it is large, double the damage that you gain. So before, we could, at the 16-second mark, have 2 shots of this thing, and that was all that we needed. We didn't really need to have anything to reload it because it had 2 ammo, and generally if you didn't defeat your opponent at the second time that the torpedo went off, you probably weren't winning the fight anyway. So this only having 1 ammo on it means that we have to work a little bit harder for that. And I think that's a good place to be, because a torpedo was rather powerful because it had like a pretty, again, low opportunity cost for what you're looking for. Didn't have a high amount of a setup cost, I should say. That's a better way to put it. It didn't really require you to do that much to make it very powerful. So yeah, I like that change overall. Lastly here, the Zorsid Enjoyers, the cooldown, it is reduced to 6. Haste duration, static 2. Damage is at 15, 30, 45, 60. So it's going to be ultimately going to be hasting your items less. It's going to have a faster cooldown though, which is nice. So it's better in the mid game, worse in the late game. This damage, pretty inconsequential. I think these are the things that we're really looking at are these 2 here. So it going off faster is nice, but once we get to that late game portion, we generally have a lot of ways to enable the burn clause of the Zorsid, which gets charged every time that we burn, and thus we wanted it to be hasting our items more. So yeah, not too much different here, I would say. But it is ultimately going off a little bit quicker, which I think is nice for, that early and mid game portion. Other things here, so the common items, we have, let's wrap up Vanessa before I keep going. So Vanessa, I like to see that they are making some of these other items viable, making more builds viable on the character. Like I said before, I think Vanessa is one of the more fun characters that you can play in the game, and thus I really enjoy what they've done changes-wise for her here. I think that this is all pretty good, and I think that they hit the things that they needed to hit. Again, my major concern was Orange Julian. I'm still not sold that this is enough that they needed to do to make this not an auto-include in every one of your runs, but I do think that having it start at silver tier will mean that it at least is just in less of them. So excited to see that. Yeah, overall, excited for Vanessa, and I think she's in a pretty good spot in Season 6 in terms of viability and a balance. So common items here. So citrus, regen skills no longer increases items' permanent gains. Same for gland. We saw that with the change that they have up at the front. The scythe now has a 7-second cooldown instead of 11, which means that, pull this up here, it's in the Void Knight fight. And this is, I think, something good to know for the Void Knight fight. This fight was generally not that hard before because the scythe was the primary damage dealer at 11 seconds, but it was just so slow. It at 7 seconds makes the fight way, way, way more difficult. So just know that when you click the Void Knight, it's going to be a lot harder. Lastly here for the common items, Hands of Time now properly no longer targets tools with no cooldown. Hands of Time. Oh yeah, this thing. Every time I see this thing, I'm like, I've never seen this item before, and I've seen it multiple times, but still I look at it and like, I have no idea what this even does. But yeah, Hands of Time, I'm not going to think too much about it. Let's go to the skills here. So Advanced Synthetics, now a Dooley only, so it starts silver tier. Let's pull that up. So when you level up, upgrade a lower tier item. It's interesting that it's only on Dooley now. Yeah, that's at silver tier, good to know. Alchemical Precision removed unnecessary ammo check, which prevented it from working on items that gained the ammo tag. Interesting. New skill, Bombs Away. I do remember these. So this is a new Stelle only skill. It says when you use a vehicle or drone, you're going to burn 1, 2, 3 depending on its level. That's pretty nice. Another burn enabler for Stelle is pretty cool. We didn't get any new Stelle items this patch, so if we can get at least like some new skills, I'll take it. Next up here is Hot Air, another Stelle only skill. It says the first time you burn each fight, you are going to, one of your 2 item, or one of or two of your items are going to start flying depending on its tier. So that's pretty nice there. I think that's a really powerful skill as well, especially if we're playing like a start stop flying build. Having yet another way to make items start flying is really, really powerful. So I think look out for this hot air skill. Let's see if they have the art in here in howbazaar.gg. They don't yet, but that's okay. Next up here, equivalent exchange, correct an issue with triggers not on the same internal cooldown. Weird. Expert pilot. So this was kind of a problematic skill before. Started at bronze tier. It says your vehicles have now plus 30, 20, 30, 40, 50 damage and shield from 30 to 60%. This being a percentage based skill meant that the damage and shielding numbers on your skills were kind of absurd. This makes a lot more sense, and there were some cases where, hey, maybe you weren't even getting 20 or 30 shielding, and damage, but I think realistically, just this sort of percentage-based scaling meant that if you had an item that also was going to be scaling percentage-wise or created a lot of scaling triggers, you got super out of hand with this skill. It was obscene. So I'm glad that is different now. So Focus Strike is now in sort of a new skill, I would say. And they have renamed Temporal Strike, which used to say cooldown reduced while your enemy has a slowed item. So if you had one weapon, its cooldown was reduced if your enemy had a slowed item. And now it's a Vanessa only skill, and says if you have exactly one weapon, its cooldown is reduced by 5, 10, 15. So ultimately just another buff to the one weapon builds. And we can't get this on any other character, which is kind of a bummer, because like it was really good with Mak if we we're playing like a femur build or something like that. But ultimately, I think that this is still nice for Vanessa. It's kind of like they killed one skill and made a new one. So that's interesting that they just took the other one out of the game instead of having two separate ones. Anyway, next up here, heavy machinery, corrected an issue with it. Heat shield. It's interesting, attempted a fix to correct an occasional issue where this would not trigger. Weird. Noisy cricket ultimately has been buffed a little bit. If you have at least 7 items in play, your weapons gain 20, 30, 40 damage instead of 20, 25, 30. So more weapon spam builds on like Vanessa are pretty good. Searing Flames, when one of your burn items gains haste, it gains 1, 2, 3 burn for the fight, and was conditional on that item already having haste. So I think this is a pretty big change to both Vanessa and Dooley, the Searing Flames skill. So I can pull it up here. So now when one of your burn items is hasted, it gains 1, 2, 3 burn. We don't need to have it already be hasted, and thus we can just have this haste burn build that is going to really scale the burn damage up very quickly, because it's not going to be trying to see that haste trigger already have happened. So it's just going to be happening way sooner. And the same is going to be for this streamlined weapon, where it said before that weapon had to be hasted. Now it's just when we haste that weapon, it's going to gain damage. So that's pretty nice. Last year, I'll talk about Steel Storm. Your weapons have plus 4, 6, 8 damage for each weapon that you have. So it used to be 4, 8, 12, so a little bit of a nerf, but I don't think that's going to come up too much in the game. It just means that they've kind of put one buff to weapon spam and then one nerf to weapon spam. Maybe because they buffed Noisy Cricket, they wanted to nerf it in some other way. Okay, that's the patch. That's it. There's a lot to think about here in terms of the changes to the items. I would say the change to matchmaking, in terms of thus them giving us design goals. My overall thoughts are that I really love the change to matchmaking. I think that this is fantastic. I really think that, again, this being in the game is great, and they maybe should have just had this before, so that newer players had a more even experience. But it being in here, is great for all the folks moving forward, and I think will lead to more fun gameplay for us overall. It's interesting that they gave us design goals, and they actually, I think like a week before this patch hit, they told us these things. They gave us these design goals, so we already kind of knew what was coming down the pipeline. I like that they're doing that. I like that they're being more transparent with the community. There has been a lot of people saying, and a lot of experience where people were being like ousted from like Reddit or Discord and stuff like that for being criticizing things of this nature. And I think that created a lot of ill will in the community, and thus them being more transparent and communicative with the community, I think is at least a good step in the right direction. So I like to see that they're trying to at least tell us what's going on and what is going to be coming down the pipeline. Other than that, this is one of those patches where they did a lot of small numbers changes that are going to affect the way that we play the game, but it's really going to affect, I think, a lot of the entrenched players. It doesn't have a lot of impact on the players who may be on the fence about buying the game or people who are freshly coming into the game. I think that, there's not a lot of here that I'm personally super, super excited about. In terms of like all new gameplay. I think it's really this matchmaking that is going to make me a little bit more enticed to want to play, just because I kind of want to see how it all plays out. Other than that, I think that this patch is on track to meet all their design goals, and I think that they did what they wanted to do, but I don't know that they addressed all the balance changes that I would have liked to see. But I do think that in terms of like playing the game more consistent and fun, they have made a lot more changes to make like builds more viable and overall the player experience better. With that, I will want to see what they bring in terms of new items in the future and new characters and all that sort of stuff. We didn't really get any of that. We just got a couple new skills here for this season. So season 6, it's going to look like very similar to what it did in season 5, it appears, just with some numbers changes, which is not the worst. Season 5 was pretty fun. I actually, in season 5, and I can pull it up here in the Bazaar, I was playing the game, and normally when I play the game, can I see what I had in last season? No, I guess not. Maybe I can somewhere. When I was playing the game before, I was really kind of burnt out on trying to grind to legend every single time. So I was just only playing the game when I wanted to. I was only making content when I wanted to, and I was able to confidently get to diamond tier and have fun with every single game I played, and I wanted to play every single game. And that was in season 5. For season 4, 3, and even 2, I was kind of forcing myself to grind to get to legend because it's what I wanted to do, was my goal, but I wasn't always having fun. So the fact that I could get to the second highest rank in the game, or the second highest tier of ranking in the game, and have fun every step of the way was very different than my experiences in the past season. So I think that ultimately this phase where we're at in the game of its balance is really good, and it's really fun to play. So I'm glad that they in some ways didn't shake things up too much, but ultimately I am still wanting to see more, especially knowing that where the game is at currently, at least the Steam rates for people playing the game in terms of the numbers of folks who are actively logging on and playing, it does look like it's going down, and I want that to go up. I think it's a great game. It's not to say that the game is dead or that there won't be a resurgence of players to the game, but I don't think that we're going to get that resurgence here in season 6. Still, it's in a pretty fun spot, and yeah, I'm overall excited to see what they have in the Bazaar for the rest of its run. This is weird. This is a barrel beware. Okay, fair enough. All that said, I appreciate you all joining me here for another episode of the Bazaar Overexplained. I am the Bazaar Whisperer, and if you like what I do, hey, you could subscribe, but overall, I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening. Bye-bye.